I think, Sakib, you are the first one to start here in terms of who's logged in. Please proceed.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. The Maryland Israel Development Corporation Center was an organization created in 1988 by Governor William Donald Schaefer to encourage Israeli companies to open offices in Maryland and to incentivize and to fund a recruitment effort to bring those companies to Maryland. That organization, the MIDC, receives over $300,000 per year from the state of Maryland and tens of thousands of dollars more from the counties. Most of the companies that the MIDC has recruited from Israel to Maryland have been arms manufacturers who sell weapons to the Israeli military. I'm not sure that that organization, if it weren't already created, would be created today by Governor Moore, but it has been in existence since 1988, and it just kind of keeps going without people questioning. And the funding it doesn't go down. It just stays the same or increases without really much question or controversy. No other country, Maryland has no similar organization or entity to recruit companies from South Korea or Canada or England or Mexico or any other country in the world. And I've tried to ask legislators and leaders why. Why is this case? What's special about this one country, Israel, that's different than all the rest of the countries in the world? They all have great companies too. And nobody has been able to give me an answer. Nobody even wants to talk about it, frankly. So, many of you legislators are immigrants or children of immigrants. Ask yourself, does this make sense to have a dedicated funding stream for this one country, getting hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax money, and a very wealthy country at that? And all of that doesn't even address the human rights issues, which we all know about, which have all been in the news for the past year and frankly for decades before that. Please defund the MIDC, or at least open it up to make it for all countries of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Isa Haddad, you're next.
Thank you, members of the delegation. On February 12th, our Senator Chris Van Hollen said of the Israeli government, "Kids in Gaza are now dying from the deliberate withholding of food. In addition to the horror of that news, one other thing is true. That is a war crime. It is a textbook war crime, and that makes those who orchestrate it war criminals." In an interview last week, Senator Chris Van Hollen said, "President Biden's inaction, given the suffering in Gaza, is shameful. If the president doesn't mean what he says about holding Israel to account for the lack of aid going into Gaza, then he should stop saying it because he looks so weak. My message to you tonight is to not follow the path of shame and weakness. Maryland taxpayer dollars should not be going to Israeli military contractors via the Maryland Israel Development Center, especially when the Israeli government is blatantly violating international humanitarian law. It seems inconsistent, to say the least, that the Maryland General Assembly can take steps to curb gun violence in our state, yet it is providing money to Israeli military contractors that give the ability of the Israeli government to carry out gun violence on civilians in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon. As a Christian Arab, I fear our federal government and media perpetuate Arab and Muslim bigotry at home while disregarding Palestinian and Lebanese lives abroad. Don't let Montgomery County and our state remain complicit in militarism and genocide. Please defund the Maryland Israel Development Center or ban Israeli tech and military firms from benefiting from our tax dollars." Thank you.
Thank you. Liz, you're next.
Hi, my name is Liz Cabrera Holtz, and I'm a resident of Potomac, Maryland. I'm speaking tonight to urge the delegation to work to defund the Maryland Israel Development Center, which benefits Israel's military industry. For the past year, I, like the rest of the world, have watched Israel commit atrocities against the Palestinian people, including burning children alive, bombing hospitals, and detaining and torturing Palestinian doctors and nurses. I have no particular connection to Israel or Palestine, though I was raised by a Jewish father and a Catholic mother, and I have no expertise in Middle Eastern affairs. but no expertise is needed now. The deaths of these children, men and women, are being live streamed to our phones. Like so many people, I've seen horrific videos. This morning, I saw a video of emergency workers carry the dead body of a 7-year-old girl out of the rubble of a bombed apartment. I watched a man carry an unconscious toddler whose face was severely burned and head was bleeding down the street because there was no ambulance to carry him. And I saw a man holding the burned and severed foot of a child. Italy has stopped arms sales to Israel. This week, the US Senate will consider a joint resolution of disapproval to block weapons sales. This past weekend, Pope Francis called for an investigation into, quote unquote, his words, genocide in Gaza. And yet still, Maryland, as well as Montgomery County, continue to financially support the foreign country that is perpetrating these crimes. I appreciate the amount of money might not be large in the context of how much our state spends, but it doesn't matter because this money is also symbolic. Even a few dollars helps build support for Israel's actions and whitewash the horrors they're committing. So I asked the delegation to defund this center. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next name I had on my list is Amin Shahada, but Mohammed, I think we might have, sorry for the disconnect. I think you're next.
Oh, no worries. Either name works for me, so thank you. So good evening, members of the House delegation. I'd like to begin in the name of God, who's the most merciful to all of humanity and mankind, and the most compassionate. So we see all these participants here tonight verbalizing different priorities for Montgomery County. These are all good. But here we have the county giving around $300,000 per year to an apartheid state, committing the most egregious, the most abominable, and the most atrocious atrocities and war crimes against a defenseless population. There is an attempt at extermination and annihilation of the Palestinian people in northern Gaza as we speak. So this unwarranted favoritism towards one state certainly raises a lot of it raises serious question marks as to why are this tax revenue is getting siphoned off to a particular state as opposed to others. We don't know of any other state who receives this this type of recruitment efforts and these type of contracts. And we anticipate our remarks may go into one ear and come out the other ear for a lot of legislators, since whenever the special status that Israel enjoys with the U.S. is put under the microscope and is questioned, we tend to our legislators tend to zone out and don't apply critical thinking to this this relationship. But historians will certainly scrutinize what was the source of this unyielding loyalty and unyielding and unconditional support for a state, irrespective and regardless of how that state acts, regardless of if it's a rogue state. So we asked that there was no referendum to ask if the Montgomery County citizens would consent to this or if they acquiesce to this. But we asked that you, if you place politics and special interests over your principles, then certainly history will not vindicate you, and Montgomery County residents will see you in an unfavorable, morally depraved light. Thank you very much.
Next will be Stephen, to be followed by Nathan.
Yes, thank you very much. I've been impressed by the important priorities of all the speakers this whole evening, focusing on domestic issues, and I wish we could do that now. I have to agree with previous speakers that we need to defund MIDC. We don't send money to France or Finland or Togo or Tunisia. What is it about Israel? Just this morning, Senator Van Hollen sent a letter to his colleague explaining why he's voting for the joint resolution of disapproval to stop offensive weapons, U.S. weapons, from going to Israel, to stop funding this. Jamie Raskin earlier this year voted to stop sending weapons to Israel. Why is the state of Maryland, why is Montgomery County supporting this organization that is giving money not just to Israeli weapons and surveillance corporations, but to the Israeli government? Some of these are Israeli military agencies. It makes no sense. There's been a lot of concern about anti-Semitism in this county, but why would we enliven anti-Semitism by feeding old stereotypic tropes such as Jews are greedy, grabbing public funds for themselves? Jews are manipulative, controlling governments and the media behind the curtain like a puppet master. Jews are violent, selecting force and intimidation as the basis of human relations. You are feeding the danger of Jew hatred by this horrible appropriation of public funds, sending it to Israeli military. This must stop. This must stop this year. Stop funding MIDC. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nathan, you can proceed. Nathan, can you hear us? You can go ahead.
Hello. Roughly 1 year ago, the 9 state senators from this delegation wrote a Trumpian letter threatening to defund CASA over statements condemning Israel's actions in Gaza. Particularly of note, the letter implied CASA was complicit in a genocidal call for the erasure of Jews, a defamatory and absurd claim given the longstanding work CASA has done with communities of all faiths. It's worth noting that this threat, when carried out, represents the undercutting of critical support services for immigrants in Montgomery County. The letter, however, did make an important point. We cannot use our taxpayer money to subsidize hate. Let's talk about Israel's actions over the past year and whether taxpayer money should be used to subsidize the MIDC. Over the past year, Israeli soldiers have stolen Palestinian women's underwear and posted images with it on social media. Israeli soldiers have raped Palestinian detainees to death and in some cases allowed dogs to sexually assault prisoners. Israeli soldiers have left graffiti of male genitalia in Palestinian homes. Israel's army has left behind mass graves filled with mutilated Palestinian bodies with their hands bound in zip ties. Israel has killed water engineers, aid workers, and journalists. The New York Times reported that Israel's army uses Palestinians as human shields. Israel allows settlers to lynch Palestinian civilians and drive them off their land. Finally, Israeli leadership has repeatedly sabotaged negotiations to end the genocide and secure a release of the hostages again and again. The crisis is only worsening. In March of this year, Jared Kushner stated that Gaza's waterfront property could be very valuable, and Israel has stated that Palestinians would not be allowed to return to their homes in northern Gaza. You all have the opportunity this year to reverse course and stand on the right side of history. Don't let Montgomery County remain complicit in genocide. Cut ties with the Maryland Israel Development Center, which partners with Israeli tech and military firms. Show Israel that Palestinian lives matter to this body. Your action or inaction will define your legacy.
And last on this panel is Nadia.
Thank you and good evening. My name is Nadia Carroll. I'm a 31-year homeowner and taxpayer in Montgomery County. Most speakers here this evening have pleaded for increased funding and hopefully not even cuts to their existing funding for desperately needed services across our state, while acknowledging the huge budget deficit the state is facing. And they have asked also that wealthy corporations pay their fair share. Well, I'm asking you to cut some funding to enable these other people to get their budgets met. Cut funding to the Maryland Israel Development Corporation, which assists wealthy corporations who are not paying their fair share in order to free up funds, and especially for services for behavioral health and to the disabled. Others before me have detailed the problems with the companies funded by the Maryland Israel Development Corporation, and with the problem of even having a country-specific agency. These companies have offices in high-cost places like Hunt Valley, and their employees have commensurate salaries. And the 2025 goal for the MIDC is to provide additional support to the Israeli companies presently in Maryland. Meanwhile, services for so many Maryland residents are woefully underfunded. And I would like to relate a personal experience with the lack of services for our developmentally disabled population. And as noted earlier, the serious lack of emergency psychiatric hospital beds across the state. I once spent 12 hours waiting with my child who needed a psychiatric bed, but before one became available, I had to leave her alone in the waiting area to go to a different hospital to get my scheduled cancer radiation treatment. This is unacceptable. This is not how we should be treating our residents. This is not how we enable our citizens to work to their potential and pay taxes to our great state. I urge the delegation to use our taxes to save and improve lives, not to fund foreign companies that work to destroy lives. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We did have one other witness for this panel, Raid Taya. I don't see them in the Zoom room, and I do not see any hands raised by members of the delegation. So thank you to the witnesses on this panel, and we will move to the next panel.
Thank you for that, Madam Chair. But before we move on, just a very brief comment with regard to commentary we have heard. Clearly, the misinformation, disinformation, and false information campaign surrounding the conflict in the Middle East obviously continues in full force. I will not engage in that conversation. However, I do deal in fact, and for my colleagues who are here tonight, the facts are that the MIDC has literally generated hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue here in the state of Maryland, representing tens of millions of dollars in income tax and real property tax to the state of Maryland to pay for so many of the things that we were hearing discussed at tonight's hearing. Pardon me, in addition to hundreds of jobs employing Marylanders who then in turn themselves pay taxes to the state of Maryland. The fact of the matter is, overwhelmingly, the success stories of the MIDC are about huge advances in the life sciences, technology, and overwhelmingly medical innovations and life-saving vaccines and drugs that help humans across the world. So, as I said, I deal in fact, and with that, I thank your indulgence momentarily. And our next panel will start with Michelle